Okay, grade 12, you've just basically finished the theory section of the lesson on the shutdown rule. Okay, and now we're going to look at what the shutdown rule looks like on a graph. The graph does not appear in your workbook. It did appear last year in the grade 11 book, okay, but you don't have it in your textbook this year. So I want you now again to draw this graph with me. So in your workbook, you are going to write today's date. Okay, if you're going to do this today, then the date would be the 3rd of June. And then your heading is the shutdown rule. Okay, now the reason why I'm specifically letting you write down this graph is that recently they've asked the shutdown rule based on a graph quite often. All right, you will see also in the activity that we are going to do at the end of this long section, there's also a question there where you have to draw the shutdown rule on a graph and explain it with the use of a graph. So it is important that you be able to draw the graph, but also to interpret a graph if they actually give you a graph in a data response question. Okay. So what we are going to look at first, okay, just remember in the theory lesson just now, we said that your shutdown rule, there's your shutdown rule. Okay, a firm will shut down if its average revenue or price. Okay, remember your average revenue is equal to your price. All right, so if your price or average revenue is less than the average variable cost, or your total revenue is less than your total variable cost, then the firm will shut down. So the key thing that we are looking at is the variable cost. Okay, that is what will determine if a firm is going to shut down or not. Now, remember we said your total cost is divided between fixed cost and variable cost. The fixed cost we have to pay. Even if we shut down, we're still going to have to pay the variable cost of the fixed cost in any case, but it is the variable cost that we can avoid paying if we shut down. Okay, so what is important is your variable cost. You are always looking at variable cost. If you have your average revenue, then you're going to look at your average variable cost. If you have your total revenue, then you need to look at your total variable cost. Okay, they won't always say TVC, it'll be just VC. VC, variable cost, is your total variable cost. The average variable cost will always be a VC. Okay, so the variable cost is the one that is important when we look at the shutdown rule. Okay, now we're going to start at the beginning. All right, we're going to say this is your industry. Now, when you draw this graph in the exam, now you're going to draw everything that I draw. But when you have to draw this graph in the exam, you are not going to include the industry. All right, I've drawn like a little teeny-weeny graph here on the side. This little graph will be just to show you what is happening in the industry. Okay, remember, because we are in the perfect market is price takers. They can't determine the price. The price is determined by the industry. All right, so we have to see what happens in the industry. All right, so we said that in the industry, there will be a negatively sloping demand curve. Now, this is your market demand curve. And there will be a positively sloping supply curve. Right, this will be your market supply curve. Where the two graphs intersect, that will be our equilibrium, where demand and supply is equal. That will determine the price. All right, so basically if the market says the price is 10 Rand, their job is done. Okay, what the industry needs to do is the industry needs to determine the price. So once demand and supply is interacted and it has determined a price, its job is done. Okay, then this individual producer, okay, that we are working with here, it's the individual producer. This individual producer takes this market price. Okay, if the market says the price has to be 10 Rand, remember our individual producer is a price taker. Nothing he does can change the price. He can increase his supply, he can decrease his supply, he can stop producing, for goodness sake. He will not influence this price. And because he is a price taker, his demand curve will be a horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve. And because this is the perfect market, your price is equal to your marginal revenue. So this graph represents the marginal revenue as well. And remember, we said in all market structures, the price is also equal to average revenue. All right. So when we know that the market price is 10 Rand, we need to put in the demand curve. We remember the demand is horizontal. It is a perfectly elastic demand curve. But that one demand curve also represents the marginal revenue curve, because in the perfect market, marginal revenue is equal to the price, and it also is equal to the average revenue curve. Now you will see the very next lesson that we are going to do, the first lesson, when you get back to school, I'm going to take you through the steps of drawing a graph. I am going to go through these steps today as well, but don't stress about whether you're understanding or not, because I will do this many, many more times. We're going to be drawing a lot of graphs from now on. All right, now when we draw a graph, we need to always draw the demand and the marginal revenue and the average revenue first. Next week when you are back at school, you will get a printed version of my secret recipe on drawing graphs. And if you follow the recipe, the graphs is really, really easy to do. Okay, so for today, I'm going to go through those steps so that next week it's not the first time that you hear it. The very first thing, we draw demand and marginal revenue and average revenue. We have done that. Okay, step one done. Because in a perfect market, this one horizontal graph represents demand and marginal revenue and average revenue. Step two, when we draw the graph, is we need to add your marginal cost graph. Okay, now I always say when we draw these graphs, try, if you have, to draw each graph in a different color. All right, it just makes it easier to see what is happening on your graph. So please, if you can, if you have different colors, please draw each graph in a different color so that you can see what is happening on your graph. Now, when we add marginal cost, we must remember the shape of marginal cost. Now, you must know the shape of marginal cost. We said marginal cost looks like the Nike swooshy. So if we're adding marginal cost, we just do it. Okay, and we label. Remember, no label, no mark. All right, so we label this one. This is your marginal cost. It's a Nike swooshy. Then step three, we have to find profit maximization point. Okay, now we've done the profit maximization rules. Remember, there's two different profit maximization rules. There's the marginal cost, marginal revenue approach and the total cost, total revenue approach. Now on this graph, we don't have total revenue, we don't have total cost. So we have to use the marginal revenue, marginal cost approach. And we said that profits are maximized where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. In the perfect market, this is really easy to find because it is the one intersection. All right. In the monopoly, it looks a little bit different and it's a little bit more difficult to find. But remember, two concepts are equal. Marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal where the two graphs intersect one another. Okay, so when my blue graph, which is marginal cost, and my red graph, which is marginal revenue, where they intersect, we are going to make a bolletjie. Okay, you don't get the mark if you don't make the bolletjie. So it's very important that you make the bolletjie. Okay, we've made a bolletjie, and now what we need to do is we need to label. Again, no label, no mark. This is my point E, profit maximization point. But we are always going to label it E. Not A, not B, not C. They do that sometimes in a data response question, but they want to see that profit maximization is labeled point E. E for equilibrium. Okay? Once we have our profit maximization point, we need to indicate the price. Now, because this is the perfect market, we have the price already. Now, because the market here determined the price, individual producer is a price taker, so his demand curve already will indicate the price. We don't have to make the dotty, 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 because our solid graph is there. We know the price is 10 Rand, but we have to indicate the profit maximizing output. Remember, output refers to the quantity. Okay, let's make this one 100. All right, so in this case, my profit maximization is at point E, where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. At profit maximization, the price is 10 Rand. We know that, the market said that. And the quantity that this producer is willing to produce is 100 units. Okay, now, remember we said when we look at the shutdown rule, we are drawing the shutdown rule, okay? Now, we said a firm will only consider shutting down if they make a loss, okay? So if this firm was making a profit, profit maximization would not be an issue, okay? It would not be an issue at all to shut down, right? Because they're making a profit. They will only consider shutting down if they make a loss. Now, you'll see I'm going to repeat this next week as well. Where we place our average cost graph will determine whether this producer is making a profit or a loss. Okay? Revenue is the income that we receive. Cost is what we have to pay. If our costs are higher than our revenue, this firm will make a loss. So we want, when we draw this, we want the average cost graph to be higher than the average revenue, because that would mean that average costs are higher than average revenue. Okay, so after we've indicated profit maximization, the next step is we need to add our average cost graph. And as I said, where we place the average cost is very, very important. We said that a firm will only shut down or consider shutting down if he's making a loss. This means that when we draw it, we have to draw it in such a way that his average costs are higher than his average revenue. So what this means is, in the perfect market, once again, this is easy because this red graph, remember, is also my average revenue graph. So if I add the average cost graph, it has to be above the average revenue graph. So we have to add it in the space above the average revenue graph. Okay, the shape of the average cost curve, remember we said it is U-shaped. It looks like a little bowl, okay? But when we draw it, we must also remember there's a fixed relationship between marginal cost and average cost. Your marginal cost will always intersect with average cost at the bottom, at its lowest point, the lowest point of average cost. So watch carefully what I'm doing now. First watch, and then you are going to do yours. Okay, when you are ready to do yours, you pause my video so that you can add your average cost graph in. Okay, so it has to have a U-shaped, it's shaped like a bowl. Okay, we need to put it higher than the average revenue, so in the space above my demand curve or my average revenue curve. It has to look like a bowl, and the minimum point, the lowest point of average cost must intersect with marginal cost, my blue graph. So when we draw it, we're going to go down, 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 down. Then as soon as we touch marginal cost, the lowest point of average cost needs to be here. So when we touch marginal cost, we're going to turn up. All right, there we go. It's U-shaped, or it looks like a little bowl, a breakfast bowl. We label it our average cost. Okay, it looks like it's supposed to. The shape is correct. The positioning is correct because it's above my average revenue graph. Plus it intersects with marginal cost here at the bottom. If you don't place your average cost correctly, so if it doesn't intersect, its lowest point doesn't intersect with marginal cost, you don't get the marks for marginal cost and you don't get the marks for average cost. So it's very important that you do this correctly. Okay, now what we need to know, obviously at this point, you'll see next week when we draw this to indicate the losses, I'm going to give you more information. I'm not going to go into that now, okay? Now remember, this is our average cost, average total cost. We're not looking for average total cost. We are looking for average variable cost. Again, this is my shutdown rule. Do we have total revenue on this graph? No, we don't. We have marginal revenue, we have average revenue, we don't have the total revenue. So we are not going to be using this rule. Okay, I'm going to scratch it out. Okay, we're not using this rule on this graph because we don't have total revenue. We have average revenue. There's my average revenue. We have price. There's my price. So we can use this rule. This is the one that we are going to be using on the graph. We have our average revenue. We now need to add the average variable cost. Average cost is there just to indicate that this business is making a loss. Remember, he will not shut down if he's making a profit. Then we wouldn't be doing this. His average cost has to be higher than the average revenue so that we know, okay, this guy's making a loss and therefore he will consider shutting down. But in order to see if he will shut down or not, we need to add the average variable cost. Okay, now again, when we put in the average variable cost, remember the shape of your average variable cost is exactly the same as your average cost. But it always has to be below the average cost because remember your average cost, this one, it includes your average variable cost plus your average fixed cost is going to give you your average cost, okay? So average cost has to be higher than average variable cost because it includes your average variable cost plus the average fixed cost. It has to be higher. All right, so when we draw the average variable cost, we are also going to draw it in the same way. It's a bucky, a little bowl shaped, U-shaped. And the same relationship that marginal cost has with average cost, it also has with average variable cost. So when we add the average variable cost, we also have to make sure that the lowest point of average variable cost is intersecting with my marginal cost graph. Okay, now we said that a firm is going to shut down if his average revenue is less than his average variable cost. Okay, when we draw this, your average variable cost has to come and lie on top of this average revenue graph. It has to be tangent. In maths, you say tangent, okay? It has to lie on top. So it has to intersect. There's my marginal cost, the blue graph. Here by my profit maximization point, that is where the bottom bit of my average cost has to be. So again, look first and then you do, okay? We're going to go down, down, down until I touch my marginal cost, which happens to be also my profit maximization point, and then I turn up, okay? Because the lowest point of my average variable cost has to intersect with my marginal cost. Then we label, because no label, no marks. That is my average variable cost. Okay, now this point E, this is basically meaning because your average variable cost is now touching here by the E, by my profit maximization point. At this point, basically it now means my average variable cost, it's also touching there. So my average variable cost is equal to the price. Okay, so we are saying your shutdown rule is the firm will shut down if my average revenue is less than my average variable cost. Okay, so anywhere below this point, okay, if prices go below this, they will not produce any further. So this point, point E, okay, on the graph, when you draw this, you physically have to say, this is my shutdown point. Okay, if you don't indicate it physically, you are not going to get the marks for it. Okay, that is my shutdown point. Okay, on the graph, it will be where my price equals my average variable cost. That is the lowest price that this guy is going to accept. Okay, anywhere below this point, if prices drop here, okay, if your demand curve shifts now, prices change, something happens in the industry and the price is changing, anywhere below this, a firm will not be willing to produce there. This is the lowest price that they will accept. Anywhere below this, they're actually going to shut down. Okay, so on the graph, at your point where price equals average variable cost, price or average revenue equals your average variable cost, this is the point where they will decide, okay, after this we're going to shut down. Anywhere below this, if the price goes even lower, we are going to shut down. Okay, so you indicate there with an arrow, you say, right, this is my shutdown point. I just want to refer back quickly. I'm not going to write any more on this graph. Just remember, we said right in the beginning of the new work for this chapter that how do we find the supply curve? Okay, for the individual producer, how do we find the supply curve? And remember, we said the supply curve is the ascending section of your marginal cost curve above average variable cost. Okay, this whole section here is ascending, upward sloping. But this bottom part of your marginal cost does not form part of the supply curve. Why? Because it's lower than the shutdown point. A business will not supply anything if it goes below shutdown point. So there won't be a supply this low because the firm is shut down there. So prices here, there will not be a supply curve. So the supply curve will literally just be this section here. Okay, from the shutdown point upwards at prices higher than your shutdown point. This cannot be part of your supply curve, even though it has a positive slope, this section. Remember, your rule says the supply curve is the ascending section, upward sloping section, above average variable cost. Because anywhere below this, there will be no production, the firm will shut down, there will be no supply. They will not supply anything there. Okay, again, you're going to please copy this graph into your book and you're going to send me a picture, please.